craft for me is a way to bring back humanity in architecture and in our built environment, and also to think about construction and architecture as a way of perpetuating knowledge.
Hey everyone, on this week's episode, we've got the Lebanese-born, Paris-based architect Lina Ghotmeh in the studio. In a field that more often than not requires incredible patience to win a large-scale commission, especially a museum, Lina practically started her career with one. I'll let her share the remarkable story of that project, the Estonian National Museum, later on the episode. But suffice it to say, it's a testament to her visionary approach to architecture, which she calls archeology of the future. I was actually one of the first journalists to report on that museum nearly 15 years ago when I interviewed Lina and her two colleagues at the time about it, and I later featured it in my 2020 book, In Memory Of. I've been closely following Lina's career for some time now, and while we've kept in touch over the years, until this episode, we'd never met in person or been in the same room together. There's a decidedly high-touch, high-craft element to Lina's work, and I think it's fair to say that her architecture is, at its heart, a celebration of the hand. For her, sustainability is as much about the quality of a building's materials and construction as it is about its emotional, social, functional, and utilitarian layers. Hers is a broader notion of what it means for a building to have a footprint. Across all of her work, Lina embeds a long view, full circle perspective. In recent years, her projects have included a brick-clad Hermès leather goods workshop in Normandy, France, a concrete apartment tower in Beirut, and the 2023 Serpentine Pavilion in London. She's currently at work on a contemporary art museum in Alula, Saudi Arabia, and just a week after she was in the studio, she was announced as the winner of a competition to design the British Museum's Western Range, which holds a third of the museum's overall gallery space. On the episode, we delve deep into much of this, including Lina's thoughts about the intersection of architecture and archaeology, as well as time, light, poetry, and atmosphere. In a way, to speak with Lina is to somehow experience her work. I hope our conversation expresses, at least on some small, humble level, how truly evocative, moving, and essential feeling the spaces she creates are. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to thank our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry Maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, Jewelry from the Collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as from private loans. From dramatic necklaces depicting rockets in flight to gem-encrusted pendants inspired by distant nebulae, to watches with intricate mechanisms that trace the transit of planetary bodies, Cosmic Splendor features nearly 70 astrological, celestial, and mythological creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos. Among the enchanting universe of pieces on display are a diamond-studded yellow, gold, and platinum meteor clip from 1951, a yellow, gold, and ruby moon pendant from 1969 that's a celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and a gold, sapphire, and diamond Diana clip depicting the goddess of the moon from 2011. These works trace the stylistic evolution and the level of expertise that this high jewelry maison, founded in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, has developed throughout its history. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at www.amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, here's my conversation with Lina. Hi, Lina. Welcome to Time Sensitive.
Hello. Very nice to see you again.
Yeah, in the flesh.
Yes.
as I was thinking about your archeology of the future concept, which we'll get deep into in this conversation, I guess we could say it's the core thesis of your work. I was thinking about this book called The Shape of Time, Remarks on the History of Things. It's by the art historian George Kubler, which, credit where it's due, I actually discovered this book because of this podcast and having Trevor Paglin, an artist and photographer, on the show. And he had mentioned this book. It was published more than 60 years ago, 1962. And in it, Kubler effectively challenges the notion of style and considers various artifacts, objects, and images as part of a much larger and longer continuum. And he challenges this traditional linear sort of historical sequencing that I think so often we wrongly assume is how time works. And he argues that the world exists in a constant process of mutation, innovation, replication. And first, I want to ask, are you familiar with this text? And second, it makes me think how your approach to architecture is very much that. It's very much this sort of idea of mutation, replication, innovation.
Yes, definitely. This is a beautiful view on things, and I think the question of time is very much linked to what we do as architects, and more specifically to my process of thinking. I always think of time as a non-linear process in the way of designing and thinking about space in a way that we are living in a cyclical time rather than in a linear time, where the process is not about moving from one step to the other, but it's always coming back to the steps and digging back to what had occurred before. So it's always like a digging process where we look at the past and we look at findings to invigorate things that we have forgotten and give them new shape and bring them into a new memory and a new original being as well. So there's this kind of maybe relationship to a continuum. And this view on time is allowing you also to see things in a much more modest way, in a way that you're not constantly reinventing or, let's say, inventing things from scratch. There is this notion of reinvention or notion of repurposing, rethinking. Even any original thought has a remnants of something that had been there before you, and the past becomes as important as the future. So there's a sense of earthly relationship also that is triggered from this view of time as a continuum, as a cyclical relationship to things.
It got me thinking as you were saying that, but also just in turning back to this book I hadn't looked at in a while, how so much of this connects back to the earth and just thinking about how things fall back into the earth. And also relevant in today's conversation, I swear these will be the only two random book references that I bring up. But I'm currently reading this book called The Long View, Why We Need to Transform How the World Sees Time. It was published just a couple of years ago. And in it, the author makes this case, which is sort of similar to Stuart Brand's kind of whole earth and sort of long now concept. He makes the case for being long-minded. He calls for this ethical approach he dubs long-termism and writes, in the early 21st century, the now commands all attention, and any sense of the past and future is filtered only through the events of the current moment. I think we all kind of feel that constantly. I wanted to ask, how do you think about your work in this context, this long-termism idea, but in the face of the very present capital N now?
Yeah. That makes me think actually of Tim Ingold and this question where material and architecture as such is in constant state of becoming, that you're constantly in a state of becoming. So you're projecting constantly in what one is doing, but you're also decaying. So in the long-termism, view of things, I'm more interested in this notion of transformation and notion of constant decay. Like whatever you build new is constantly in transformation because the material is transforming. There's a sense of the ruin that is very much present already in the new build that one is projecting. Nothing is certain in this way of thinking, like when you're projecting in long term, you're already projecting into the ruinous quality of what one is doing. And I love this thought because it makes you think about the intensity of one is doing, like what's the intensity of the experience that an architectural space can bring and how the materiality and material of the space or of an architecture can manifest itself in a strong manner today or now as it's experienced, but also is able to transform through time and is able to look at the future in a way that brings its essential quality that were drawn in the past as well at the time of conception. It's a bit an abstract thought, but time is that actually. Time does not exist without matter. It doesn't exist without light. And I'm deeply in that subject at the moment because, we just published, maybe we will come to that conversation, the book Windows of Light, and it really talks about, this relationship between matter and time and light in a way.
Actually, in preparation for this, watched your MIT lecture. I think it was from last year.
Yeah.
You talked about when starting any project, you're always looking at Earth. So again, back to that whole Earth idea, and that if we continue our way of making as we currently are, we need 2 Earths, but we don't have
more than 2 Earths now.
Exactly. We need 3
we
Earths, 4
surpassed,
Earths.
Yeah.
It brings to mind for me this spaceship Earth, Buckminster Fuller idea.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that, how you view this sort of spaceship Earth idea in your own practice?
I always start my lectures with this view of Earth, you're just like in the middle of the universe, and there are twofold feelings to that. One is this view of Earth as small and somehow as a realm that we can look at and that we can suddenly feel infinitely small actually on this space and on this ground and almost invisible when we view Earth from the space. So it puts things in context, in perspective, and asks the question of how do we build, how do we inhabit that place, how do we relate to one another, what are the boundaries or like maybe unreal boundaries that we build from one place to the other, and how can we connect to one another through what we build. And also this question that Earth does not need us actually to survive. We just need Earth to survive ourselves. There's a sense also of maybe antithesis to Buckminster Fuller in this view, because it's not about taming nature, it's not about, containing, even if, of course, the light structures are amazing, this idea of the dome, but yet it does contain Earth, it contains part of Earth. And maybe trying to look at how to free like the ground, and how do we create an opening and a woven relationship through space to Earth and to nature, where spaces are constantly porous, open to nature, allowing it to seep through, to be present, and to break boundaries rather than close boundaries.
Yeah, to be of, not separate from.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. It's the sense of continuum of being part. I mean, we are constituted of nature, so somehow we are bacteria. We are what we eat, and all these invisible elements that constitute us. That Beatrice Colomina has also evoked in her book "Are We Human?" It changes also the way you perceive space and you perceive your relationship to what you build. It pushes you to think of spatiality and architecture as more porous and more open to the living rather than enclosing and protecting us from that living, from us at the end.
Yeah, well, this is a good segue because I was thinking how your practice, and you've sort of spoken to this over time, but your practice could fit into these sort of several what we would call A's: archaeology, art, and atmosphere. And I thought we would start with archaeology, which again, perfect segue, because your archaeology of the future concept really gets at this idea. It's about an unearthing, a finding, a looking forward, but also doing so while grounded in the present and in the deep past. So it's sort of this time continuum thing that you were talking about earlier. Before pursuing your studies in architecture, when you were a student at the American University in Beirut in the early 2000s, you had this deep interest that in these subjects that led you basically to wanting to be an archaeologist before being an architect. So could you kind of share the roots of this engagement with archaeology, and how did this archaeology of the future concept kind of form out of that early engagement?
Branches.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I'm thinking about archaeology, is this field where one is brought to dig into earth. You're already engaged with that material, right? And you're engaged into looking and finding artifacts, into building stories constantly. And those stories are sometimes could be true 100%, or they get closer to a certain reality. They're never 100% real, actually, because you're, as an archaeologist, you're constantly building through the traces and trying to build up a story from what has been found and getting closer to what has been there already. So I am really fascinated with that process of unearthing and constantly being close to the ground, trying to find those objects and trying to connect them into a story, and that makes sense of how the space has been there. But also this question of disappearance and the solution actually of objects and of artifacts, and artifacts being those traces that talk about us in the future. This is very much linked to my upbringing in Beirut, as you know, because in this city that had lived war, that had lived many events, there's always the ground that remains. Everything is demolished and then becomes ground at the end. But also it's a city that talks about Ottomans, talks about Romans, Greco-Roman time, it talks about the Phoenician times, and all of this happens and is unveiled through archaeology. These layers constantly fascinated me and made me think about our anchorage in the ground and anchorage of our identity in that earth. So it's a twofold thinking, one about culture, but another side is about really matter, about the ground, about nature, and our relationship to that. As I was driven to build things or to look into the future, I was thinking how this can relate to a future figure or future existence. And architecture was for me that pretext to look into the future. So, and hence is born this idea of how archaeology can be related to architecture, and maybe architecture is an archaeology of the future that is constantly drawing us into looking at what is present and at the environment in a larger sense of the word, like looking at resources, at the ground, at traces that exist in a place, and bringing us to research any place before any intervention. And yet it's also drawing us into the future, because there is a sense of newness, of something that will emerge in time as well. And then it became a way of thinking about my practice, of also integrating research as part of the practice and part of bringing a broader world of complexities into space making and place making. So yeah, that's maybe how those ends are brought together, how archaeology makes sense in my practice.
Yeah, it's a form of digging almost. It's interesting because if you're building pretty much anything from ground up, or even sometimes rescaling something that already exists, it still requires digging into the ground. It's a foundation. A foundation and building up, right?
And this kind of also this idea of rooting and rooting architecture in a place where it talks about its climate, and almost imagining that a building is growing out of its place like a plant in a way, right?
Yeah. And the human body comes into play here too, both the idea of the archeology of the body and the architecture of the body. And this isn't to sound pretentious. I hope it doesn't sound pretentious, because I think, just going back to your roots here, you were also very interested and passionate about biology and genetics and kind of how things, including people, transform in time. How do you see genetics and biology intersecting into this archaeology, architecture conversation?
It's very much linked to the question of the living, actually, and the fact that our bodies contain the world as well. So the space is actually contained in our body, and the space that surrounds us contains us as well. So there's this sense of infinitely large, infinitely small that is constantly at play, actually. And maybe this is why now I'm thinking about it. I'm always interested in both the architectural scale, but also the scale of the object and the detail that is present in every space. This idea also of organicity and of relating to the environment and to an architecture as another skin, as a continuity to our flesh as well, interests me. And maybe the questions of interiority, and here we enter into gender and space, and how can we make architecture through the interior, not necessarily as an interior design, but through interiority as well, through this intimacy of experience that one can live in a realm. And genetics is about coding, is about transformation, in genetics, when you're bringing two different genes together, and then you're bringing two qualities into one, and then there is this transformation and transmission that is happening, like a genealogical tree. And that idea of branching, of looking at past elements and bringing them together like a cadaver exquis way, is something that interests me. And that brings into play an architecture that solicits memories, that talks about what had been there. Like, for example, when we're looking at one of the buildings that I realized with my atelier, the Hermès atelier workshops, people, when they inhabited the place, they were thinking there's a sense of memory, there's a sense that this place has been there before, but yet it's very new as well. So this kind of combination between what is there and what is new, things that have been talked about with Gaston Bachelard, phenomenology of space, explain why we experience places in a strong way.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break here to tell you a little bit about our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry Maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, Jewelry from the Collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references. Featuring nearly 70 celestial, mythological, and astrological jewelry creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos, the exhibition presents an enchanting universe of jewelry from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as contemporary creations, some of them on loan from private collections. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at www.amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, back to the episode. Actually, this connects to the second A, which is art. We could say art and craft, I suppose. There's definitely a craft element at play here, but I want to start with art because photography, drawing, painting, these are all tools in your practice and have played a key part of how you work from the start. So you've also collaborated with many artists and artisans and craftspeople over the years. So actually including most recently the Colombia textile artist Olga de Amaral for her exhibition last year at the Cartier Foundation in Paris. And I was looking at how in conceiving that exhibition, you painted these beautiful watercolors. It was almost like being inspired both by the building itself, this incredible Jean Nouvel glass structure, and then also by Olga's textile works, which are these really multi-dimensional pieces. So could you talk about drawing and painting and how essential they are to the architecture that results, or in the case of this project, the exhibition design?
Mm-hmm. I think art brings emotions actually into both the scale of architecture, but also in the process of making architecture. And I believe that the emotional process is very important throughout the making because it engages you with what one is doing. And when you're painting, there is a sense of relationship with the hand, and here we talk about the power of the hand, what Johanni Palasma also had talked about, the eyes of the skin. Yeah. So it's really like this power of the hand to connect to space and also to be connected to the environment as such. And when drawing, there's always something new, something unexpected that happens that you haven't planned. So there's no long-termism. There's unexpectedness that happens. And there's a sense almost that the universe is present when one draws, and when you have this watercolor like seeping on the material on a page.
You can only control so much, right?
Yes, and especially with watercolor. I mean, it's just the material is there to transform your intention as well. And it's a meditative process that allows you to fall in love also with architecture and with the process of designing. And that's what I love about it. I mean, architecture, if it's able to convey art and to convey emotions, it actually also, it's a way of elevating further architecture. It is a functional realm. It's a place for inhabiting, but also for inhabiting in an extraordinary way that allows your senses to be present and to feel again your body in full in the realm where
we've all felt it, this sense of awe.
Yeah.
That washes over you when you walk into the Pantheon in Rome or
Louis Bergin.
Yeah. I've even experienced it in a funky building like the Pompidou in Paris.
Yeah.
Like there's still that feeling of just something extraordinary is taking place here.
Yeah, it's as if you are in front of an amazing natural scene as well, if we can get close to those feelings that we get when we are in wild nature on beautiful scenery. That brings us closer to our essence as beings and natural beings, I think. Before I talk about the exhibition itself, there is a lot of relationship to time because you started with time. The question of threading and of making is very much embeds time, embeds us and our universe as well. And there's cosmic quality, meditative quality in her work, and yet very architectural quality as well, with this constant threading geometric patterns that arise. And I saw almost a landscape that arises from every piece, and I wanted to highlight that and to work rather with the pieces as spaces, as pieces that are able to generate in-betweenness and spatialities in the way they are positioned, and in the way just by slate rock in the gallery, it transforms the way we perceive the work. So the whole exhibition is divided into three main spaces. The ground floor, which is a big open space that is related to the garden where we have her largest works. It's a space that is related to the garden, and the idea was to bring the garden in and to bring in new elements, which are those big boulders made out of slate stone. And the presence of those boulders completely transforms our perception actually to the works. It brings us into a surreal landscape that is made out of those dark black stones that anchor all the pieces onto the ground as well. And from there, you move into another room where you're experiencing the sky and you're experiencing a falling colorful rain. And those are her works named brumas, and they're just all colorful threads, and they're suspended there in a box that is semi-reflective, and you're really suspended in a colorful cloud in that space. And then you, after, are invited to go in the underground and basement of the Fondation Cartier. It's for me, the underground is a womb. It's a place of protection. You know, I grew up in Beirut with the war, and going to the basement was a way to protect oneself. So it's a place that emphasizes this kind of womb-like quality where everything is curved, where these pieces become dreams that you encounter, and you just walk in between and discover her fascination with gold, where she started really making part of her work like these golden leaves and golden patterns, and they become more and more. You move, gold is more present, and then you end up with the stellas in the last room. They're really the most rigid of her works, and they're just standing in a circular space, and that brings you back to earth. So it is a journey through time, through light, through material, and through also an intersection between art, architecture, and craft.
I'm sure every listener is now going to want to see images of this. So,
well, it's going to Miami. So it's,
good, but we'll
not the same scenography.
We'll put images on our timesensitive.fm website. So everyone listening, I'm sure after that beautiful description by Lina, you all want to see these images. They'll be on our website. Let's talk craft really quick, because so much of your work, it's a material study in a way, and it's thinking about materials almost as memorials of where they came from. And I think also this sort of idea of craft embedded in fabrication and construction. I'm thinking here of your textured concrete skeleton of the stone garden in Beirut, or the Hermes project you mentioned earlier, which has this incredible artisan brickwork, these 500,000 bricks that were made locally. Maybe just talk a little bit about this artisanal quality to what you do, which I think sadly is all too rare in architecture these days, but can really be done thoughtfully and in a way that we would call sustainable, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Craft for me is a way to bring back humanity in architecture and in our built environment, and also to think about construction and architecture as a way of perpetuating knowledge, the knowledge that is embedded in our hands, our ancestors' work, and to allow it to be present in any building, and to take the building also as a pretext to continue that construction or that process of writing our book in a way. When looking at Beirut, for example, this idea of emerging a building, and of course through our technologies today, but yet bringing a skin that talks about the hand of many migrants that are present today in Lebanon or Beirut, valuing their presence and their work, was also about engaging them in this process of making and of conception, and allowing the workers and the artisans to be proud of what is built. So it really reconnects the makers to what is made. And I believe this is very important, because we have to be engaged in our environment, in what we make. And there's a sense of care, a sense of respect that arises, and sense of maybe sustainability, environmental awareness that is rising with that. So both it's about technology, it's about sustainability, the environment at large, brought together at once when we're engaged with craft. It's not a backward thinking mode. It's very important that for me, it's a way of bridging between technology and our capacities as humans, and valuing what we humans are able to do and how we can push further that capacity in the future. Building a workshop with 550,000 bricks was also about optimizing the number of bricks with the structure, because it's about building structurally with bricks and using our calculation tools, technology to have the smallest or the thinnest arch possible. So it's also pushing our knowledge today and allowing that to push our way of constructing. At the same time, bringing masons that have forgotten how to build with brick and allowing that knowledge to be present again. And that emanates a sense of beauty at the end that is related to an act of sustainability, of durability, ecology, but also of the act of making with time, threading almost a building, almost like Olga's, Olga de Amaral thread.
Well, it reminds me too of your watercolors and just this thinking about the joy of creation. AI can only do so much for us, right? Like at the end of the day, there are still things that AI cannot do. And those are those deeply innate human caregiving qualities. And I would argue at the level of architecture, if we're talking about caregiving, that's where craft comes in. I mean, the care that you take in your process and translate that to the builder or the mason or, the brick maker, the bricklayer.
Yeah, I think AI is a revolution. We will use it, and it's really amazing. If used in a good way, it will transform our lives. It will better our lives. And I think it's at the same time very important to remember what makes us human and how can we invest in that further. How can we push our humanity further, and maybe allow AI to be a tool that allows us to invest better in what makes us human. And our relationship to matter is very much one that is specific to us, that AI could not replace and will not replace. How do we relate to one another as human beings, as well as matters one another as bodies, but also how do we relate to our environment and to caring about this living ecosystem that surrounds us. And there are many creative ways to build that continuum. And I think we should invest in that knowledge and further that ecosystem. Hopefully AI can help us do that.
So now just to return to the third and final A, atmosphere, which the architect Peter Zumthor has written so beautifully about in a book called Atmosphere. Yeah. He writes about the emotional response or release that can come from certain material presence, or when a coalescence of things combine in space to just create more or less awe. What's your personal definition of atmosphere, and how do you go about realizing it in your projects?
Talking about the book of Peter Zumthor, I really love the passage where he talks about himself as a child. It's a moment where he opens, I think it was the door of the kitchen or like a space in his own home, and where he felt the atmosphere of that space. And I believe that atmospheres are about bringing you back to become a child again. There's a sense of you becoming again just a kid or child, like enjoying really and deeply enjoying what surrounds you and engaging you to play. And the play means also touching materials, being joyful in where you are and feeling that intimacy of space that is present, whether in a public space or in your private place. So that atmosphere is really emerging from that moment, from that sentiment, but is also possible because of the material quality of a place, but also the time embedded in that place, the time of care, the time of making that environment, and the relationship between light and matter as well. And this is where we go back to the importance of light as a matter itself.
Well, tell me about your youth. You were born and raised in Beirut and remained there through your studies. Your mother was trained as an architect. Your father was a contractor. Paint a picture of this upbringing. I mean, your parents, your family's home, your life in the city, and I guess more broadly, the life of the city.
Yeah. It's a Mediterranean city, so the light is very much present there. It's a stark light. It's a light of contrast that brings on materiality and beauty in everything, even in a left out corner. And this is a site that is very much present in me. That desire of light and of colors that is brought from this light hitting a surface, but also the deep blue, the sea that is present, and nature that brings beauty even in the most chaotic of cities. I also lived between Beirut and the mountains because my father is originating from a small village up in the mountains. So this idea also of being both in a built space in a dense urban environment and suddenly being on a mountain and surrounded by green is a site that is deeply embedded in what I do. But also the site of constructors doing vernacular architecture, like through stone, for example. Chiseling stone, building by hand is very much something that I grew up looking at and seeing the built spaces happening in front of me. So it did affect the way I perceive architecture today, naturally. Going back to light, I think in a context like Lebanon or in Beirut, you have the 4 seasons. So you see also light in different gradation and different colors and how it affects the atmosphere of a city and of an environment. And there's always a desire to build and to think of architecture as a way of bringing people together because I lived through, I was born in 1980, so I lived the years of the war, as a child. So for me, architecture and looking at the city was a way to bring things together. How can I mend or heal what I'm seeing actually, and how can I use architecture as a way of bridging and of connecting rather than degrading and demolishing.
It's not lost on me that your parents have it was like having this hybrid architect builder mindset in the house around you.
Yeah, my mother studied architecture when I was a child. She never practiced as an architect, but growing up, I saw her doing her models. And actually, when I was a child, I didn't want to be an architect. I wanted to be a doctor, a genetic medicine, or an archaeologist. But somehow I spent all my childhood drawing, and I had so many drawings all the time. So somehow I was meant to be an architect, but I didn't know it. And being surrounded with professionals, whether my father or my mother, definitely influenced my insight on space and architecture.
Was there a building or buildings in Beirut or in Lebanon that kind of stood out to you as you were beginning to form this interest in architecture and in the built environment?
What stood out first was not necessarily constructions. Buildings are more like natural elements that you can see in the city. Like, for example, the Pigeon Rock in Mediterranean Sea is this rock that is just standing in the middle of the sea, is something that opened constantly my imaginary. It felt like a built structure in the middle of the sea. And of course, afterwards, Beirut is full of those structures that are completely left out, like the Burj Al Mor, like this tower that is sitting in the middle of the city that is almost like an observation tower and completely uninhabited because it was built and then the war broke and it never got inhabited, like this concrete shell. Or the cinema that is this egg that is suspended in the middle. So you have these brutalist architectures that are present in the city, or the Wardi building by Khalil Khouri that has an amazing sculptural presence. They are present there and they're like ghosts, actually. They're just concrete structures and just sitting there. They have a massive presence and they always talk to me in a way. And the Beirut lived a lot of modern architecture, so you could see a lot of reminiscence of modernism, and that's very inspiring as well. But I would say also what always inspired me are natural elements, actually, or natural forms that existed, whether in the city or beyond.
And I think true to your archaeology interest, it is really a city upon cities, right?
Yes, yes, it's constantly built upon itself. So you're constantly unveiling, when a new building has to be emerged in Beirut, you always find some archaeology underneath. Of course, unfortunately, there's no protection plan, so they disappear. And at some point I was taking photos of those, moments of disappearance and trying to hack them. It's fascinating to see those.
Hey everyone, taking another quick break here to tell you about our weekly newsletter, where I share a behind-the-scenes look into each time-sensitive episode, and where we also get into various things in the cultural sphere our team at The Slowdown is paying attention to. You can sign up and join our 13,000 plus other subscribers by going to slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. And now, back to the episode. In 2001, you left Lebanon for this internship with Jean Nouvel in Paris. You later also worked for Norman Foster in London, and I wanted to ask, reflecting on it now, how you think about your time working at the studios of these two architects and how they shaped you early on.
Well, that was 21 years ago, but I think at that time it was a very short experience in reality. It was just between 2003 and 2005, so end of 2005, and then I won the Estonian National Museum in 2006. So it was a 2 years time of experience, and it was mainly getting to know two different ways of working. The atelier of Jean Nouvel, which was more like a bit more artisanal, but also that of Foster with a great organization. And I was lucky to meet them both and really see the processes of work. And it got me to discover two cities, Paris and London as well, and get attached to both of them, and somehow realize myself in terms of my own identity, realize that I relate basically to both cultures as well, whether French or Anglo-Saxon culture, in addition to my Lebanese Arabic roots. Maybe architecturally speaking, I don't know whether, and I'm not sure I have any influence from one another. I think I was bringing my own architecture through my bringing in Beirut and through what I have built up throughout my studies at the American University of Beirut.
Well, you mentioned the Estonia National Museum, which I think for the listeners who aren't familiar with this story, I just want you to share it here. It's this remarkable tale of three young moonlighting architects who put this proposal together in an open competition, and maybe miraculously, and also not because it was such a great proposal, but the project won. There's not many cases of this. You could point to the Pompidou in Paris with Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, them being young architects, or a young Maya Lin winning the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. But this is extremely rare that moonlighting architects would win on a open competition.
Yeah.
So, and it's gone on to change the course of your life. So I guess, yeah, share this story in brief and what occurred.
Well, that was in 2005 when I was working at Foster and Partners. During the break, I found this competition for the Estonian National Museum, and I was 25 by then. I looked at this amazing competition for a national museum in Estonia, and Estonia at that time was just joined the European Union in 2003, and in 91 it broke from the Soviet times, and for them it was a way to talk about identity and to build their own museum that where they can display their collection that is a Finno-Ugric collection. It was a beautiful brief also that questions notions of ethnography and relationship to collection and what is a museum, what is a national museum today. So I was very intrigued. I thought this is amazing. Like and also especially that it's a context that had lived war. The site itself has one of the largest Soviet ex-military airfields. So it talks about that painful history as well. Along the same time, I met two colleagues. They were working, one of them at Jean Nouvel and another one, another office in London. One Italian, Dan Durell, and Tsuyo Shitane, who's like a Japanese architect. And then I invited them to, well, let's do this competition together and let's see what happens. We barely met.
Yeah, three young architects, not even a formalized firm.
Yes,
applying.
not even super, let's say, close. Or I was just like, wanted to do this and let's do it in a group. And that was really fun. And we started doing this project, and then we submitted our proposal early in January 2006. I got this call that we won this project, and I was in front of Centre Pompidou, as you were mentioning, that building. It was crazy, like 26 years old, we win this project. Of course, nobody believed us that we will build this project. So when I won, and together with my colleagues, everybody was telling us, oh, drop it, don't leave your jobs, you will never build this project. I was like, no, we will build it, like risk-taking. I'm afraid of nothing. And we just set up our practice, arrived to Estonia. They were very surprised to see us. They thought we were an Estonian team who won this project because it was very contextual as a project. And then fought together with the director of the museum to make this happen. So it took 10 years to build this project. It was really amazing journey. It's a 40,000 square meters project, 90 million euro project. So it was a great way to start a practice. You have a 360 view of what is it to be an architect. And generally, architects finish their profession with such a large project. I started mine with this.
When we talked about this in a previous conversation we had, where I found it fascinating that this building, its form literally takes off from the ground, and so too did your practice.
It was very controversial when we won, because the whole idea was to come up with a building that connects to that airfield and transform that airfield into a ground for manifestation for the museum itself, and also re-transform the history in a way. Also,
literally rising out of this dark past,
exactly,
World War II.
Exactly. Yeah. And there was a lot of polemics whether this airfield had to be completely erased, or why should we connect to it? And it was all about, the role of architecture to become urban, to regenerate its site, and to talk about the past rather than enclose itself as an independent building of its site.
When I think about this building and when I think about your work at large, it really makes me think about poetry. There is this poetic to it. And maybe this is too on the nose, but early on, you also designed this proposal never realized for the Rimbaud Museum in France.
Yes, I remember.
And this was a space meant to showcase the life and work of the 19th century French poet. Did that engagement on some level get you thinking about this intersection of poetry and architecture, and maybe perhaps lead you, at least in some sort of philosophical sense, down these avenues of poetry and architecture?
That's a beautiful question, because I always feel like architecture is about poetry. There's a sense of textual quality to architecture. Poetry in the way that it is about relating words, sometimes in an abstract way, allowing you to reinterpret and to live things as you hear them in a way, or as you experience them. I think that is also linked to Arabic as a language. More I move on, I realize also that Arabic as a language is very rich and very metaphorical, and it has multiple facets of meanings, and there's a sense of poetics that is very much embedded in that language. For example, the word love has, maybe more than 25 ways of saying the word love. And that multiplicity is very much present in my culture and in the way I perceive space. I make space as well, and maybe brings also that poetics. I think the experience of designing that unrealized project for Arthur Rimbaud was really also interesting, because Arthur Rimbaud and Verlaine were in love together, and the whole story was about this poet that is constantly in torture. He's always flying away and running away from Charleville-Mézières, which was his original city and where the museum had to be built. And there's a notion of escape that is constantly present both in his poetry and in the museum itself, and had to be translated in space. So the whole space is this kind of a sharing space, like this kind of like multiple levels that open up with staircases interlinking one another, but also the floor of it opens to the water because it's really set on the river. So it's open, there's no ground, it's constantly, there's always an escape route into that place. It echoed also the poem, Le Bateau Ivre, the drunken boat. It intersects in that project more in a literal and direct way, poetry and architecture and history.
Well, here let's talk about your new research book, Windows of Light, which gets into poetry for sure. Also how light impacts things biological, astronomical, architectural. And this book doesn't come out of nowhere, I should say. It is this notion of light and engagement with light is so much a part of your practice. It's a key focus of your work. And in fact, you've even done light-specific projects. I'm thinking of your 2015 Light and Water installation, or the lighting installations you were tapped to create at the Akura Tokyo Hotel, which are extraordinary. Tell me about your time engaged in light and in lighting and in thinking about crafting it, installing it, using it as an architectural and atmospheric device.
Just a few words about the book. It talks about the process of my practice, and it's always a research-driven process. So the whole book is really research on light and like a series of field notes that plunge us into an archeology of light, where we start looking at the origin of light, or how light was captivated throughout time, looking at how we as humans surveyed light, and then looked at moments where light does not exist in some places, like in Beirut, and maybe more like poetical approach to things, light through material and through making. This notion of light and this research really made me realize how much, space and how much matter is very much linked actually to light, and we perceive our spaces through light constantly, and through light and darkness is as important as light. And the whole book opens with this image of the CMB imagery of our universe, which is this cosmic microwave background, and this photo of that represents the afterglow of the Big Bang, and is an amazing photo. It really talks about the moment of creation of the universe with the Big Bang, and where the whole universe was almost along the same temperature. It also makes you realize that these particles, these fossils of the origin of the whole universe are still surrounding us all the time. So it's mind-boggling, actually. And it plunges you in the phenomenology of space, and emphasizes further the importance of this relationship between material and light, and to generate a sense of time constantly. When I'm designing, I'm always looking at natural light, artificial light, and darkness intertwined together. whether it's through a building in Beirut like Stone Garden, where there's measuring of the opening and the window and its relationship to the outside. So it's not a glass building. It talks about the Mediterranean climate where it is. And here the window becomes a device that frames the outside and transforms the outside into a photography almost towards the apartment. So as if you're looking at the city as framed photos within your personal space. Or whether it is in the project of Hermès, where the light is flooding inside the ateliers with the northern diffused light, because they're working the leather and it's about the precise light inside the space. Or through moments of scenography or exhibition design, where artificial light or natural light play a moment of creating heightened atmospheric moments in that sense, where you're plunged in the perception, special perception of an object in front of you. And more specifically in Okura Heritage, it was this kind of light presence of lighting fixture in that case, with this Okura wisteria that is suspended.
Right. 2,400 pieces of purple crystal.
Yes, that they talk about the wisteria, which is this flower that is very much the symbol of this hotel as well. Another lighting fixture that I did was also in Palais Tokyo. Like the whole space was orchestrated by
restaurant.
light. Yeah, the restaurant with the like 250 or 300 lights, pendant light, and they created the intimacy of the whole space thanks to those lights, actually.
Maybe to finish the conversation, we should morph this into the subject of lightness. We'll go from light to lightness, and back to where we began with this whole earth, long view, thinking conversation. Particularly, I'm interested here in your research into zero carbon or low carbon spaces, which, given our climate emergency that we're in, I think it's really the only way forward, much as people would like to think otherwise. Could you speak to some of your projects in this area in particular, whether that's your zero carbon hotel concept or the Hermès workshop in Normandy we talked about, or even the Serpentine Pavilion from 2023? These are all designed to minimize waste and have this sense of renewal and longevity embedded into their very nature and structure.
You know, in these thoughts, I always believe that architecture, to exist, it has to be worthwhile. It has to have a positive impact on its environment in all senses, in all fields, let's say, both as a space that one enjoys being in, but also as a structure itself in its built materiality has a positive impact rather than like heavy carbon footprint. Otherwise, it's not worthwhile existing in a way. And in this thought, one has to think in a holistic way. So how do you build low carbon, energy positive construction? And as such, the workshops for Hermès is the first low carbon, energy positive building in France. And that pushes you to have a holistic thinking, to both think of the material with which we are building, and the brick is coming from the earth of the site and is made just really a few kilometers away from the site. What biosourced material we can use, and that's beautiful because it allows any construction to be really connected to nature and have the sense of beauty as well. And when we talk about biosourced materials, we're talking about materials that could become earth again, you know, with time. They are everlasting, but they can also be biodegradable at some point. And it's also a way of thinking in a smart manner how to design, how to be mimetic, but also how to compact the building, how to respond to the wind direction and ventilate, take advantage of the sun direction, really elements that we used to always think about, but maybe our cities do not allow us anymore to do it and as such. So it's a beautiful and complex system of relationships that should be established to have this positive impact. And the result is an architecture that is more perennial, that really wants to be there, and where you want to be in it, actually, and that respects the human. And this mode of thinking is also one that refuses waste, the question of waste, where everything is a resource, where every hand has a role in our society. And that's an important shift to make in our society. It's a very urgent one, where we could act as one. Whenever you do something in one place, it has an impact in another place. We saw that in COVID times. We're seeing it today with the events that are happening. And it's very urgent that we think about our Earth as an ecosystem and us as interrelated, that any action you do, it bounces back to you again. And this thinking also is something that I wanted to bring in the Serpentine Pavilion by making a place of togetherness, a place where people are invited to be around one table in a circular manner. The structure of the pavilion is built with wood, so it's a lightweight structure. It's meant to be a temporary pavilion, that is where you build it and then unbuild it and put it somewhere else. This thinking is always present in my work now in Osaka. Also, we're finishing the pavilion for Bahrain for the Osaka Expo. And the whole building is like a boat structure built by those wooden elements that are present in Japan, and more specifically close to Osaka. And they are not engineered wood, so they can be used again. So it's just about building and then dismantling and using the whole construction again. So it's about no waste.
Yeah, and I think that serves in an interesting way as sort of a metaphor for the more, quote, permanent projects that architects do. And I love this idea that architects could, and I think should, I mean, it will become necessary to design with this, to go back to your archaeological mindset, exactly that. I mean, meaning that one day what an architect builds will eventually, at long last, fall back into the earth. So why not design buildings as a sort of form of ecology, as this idea of eternal return? Yeah,
definitely. I love that. I love what you're saying. And I think, Spencer, it's really about also how do you build in an ecosystemic way? It's not necessarily only about architecture or the architect. It's about building partnerships, because that's where ecosystem is important, because it's about also a client and a partner that really wants to do that, that fights with you and goes all the way. It's not only us as architects that are responsible for our built environment. We build very little today in our cities and built world. So we need those partners, and we need people that have a value system that and who want to make a difference.
Thank you so much, Lina. This is really great to be able to sit down with you at long last.
Thank you so much. That was really fun and nice to talk to you as well.
Extra thanks to our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels. Since its founding in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, Van Cleef & Arpels has developed a distinctive blend of poetry and refinement. With its jewelry and watchmaking collections, the Maison is an invitation to a timeless universe of beauty and harmony. You can discover more at vancleefarpels.com. That's VANCLEEFARPELS.com. And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Time Sensitive on our website, timesensitive.fm, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To keep up with our latest time-sensitive episodes and get behind-the-scenes updates, sign up for our newsletter at slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram at slowdown.media. Our theme music was composed by Billy Martin. This episode was produced by Ramon Broza, Mimi Hannon, Emily McDonald, Kylie McConville, and Johnny Simon.